Hello, my name is Mark DiCarlo. Tonight my guest is Mr. Chris Waller, local attorney, and he was telling me stories from his youth in San Diego, Texas before the show, because you have this internet handle or nickname, Cristoforo, etc.
Right.
And you said you got that as when you guys were getting in mischief in San Diego?
Yes, we did. The way it started out with Facebook was 5-6 years ago when Facebook started. I didn't even know what it was. And the guys at the office were having a contest at how many friends they could get quicker. So I didn't want to have my name on there, so I said that was my funny name, so I put that name as my handle, and it kind of just took off. So it's Cristoforo das Montañas Verdes de Coahuila Waller.
Yeah, named for the great Italian explorer Cristoforo Columbus. Cristoforo Colombo, I think it was. Facebook, I try to keep my friends to like 200 or so. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know about. I think there's some studies that indicate more than 200 or something. You can't keep really in touch with them or something like that. We had a local election. I was going to say we had local elections. We had state elections. Judge Longoria lost. Mm-hmm. We had a new person, Ina Klein, who won. Did you take any position regarding any of these local races, or you kind of kept low? Because I know you're a practicing criminal defense attorney, right? You do criminal law, and I've seen you in court. Sometimes we got to kind of keep a low profile in case we don't know who's going to win. Did you take any position on any of the local elections?
Nope. I'm from Duval County, so Nueces County politics, I kind of take a step back from it.
Right, of course. I noticed, because you're one of my internet friends on Facebook, you post about guns a lot, so I guess you're a strong believer in the right to keep and bear arms for the citizenry. Is that what your primary interest in is regarding guns? Or
well, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. And I feel that each and every single one of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, are equal. And, of course, if there was an attack on the First Amendment, I'd be just as hardcore about that. But there is a lot of attacks on the Second and the Fourth Amendment, and I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I feel pretty strongly about that.
Okay. Well, you ever been up north where it's crowded?
No.
Okay. It's pretty crowded up there, and they got some pretty violent inner cities. And the United States is so big. When I was younger, in particular, I was much more in favor of gun control. I'm a licensed gun holder here. Funny story, though. You know why I became a licensed gun holder? I had one or two profile, they call them high-profile cases. They get publicity. You know how that is. You don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden, there's all this media. I was kind of impliedly threatened by the people on the kind of the right that were mad I was defending, these people. And I said, well, gee, I don't know how good, if this gun is really going to protect me, but it might, there's a chance, so I'll go ahead and get licensed. So that was kind of my story. And I've changed my attitude to a certain extent regarding guns, especially here in Texas. But I would say in the inner cities in New York or New Jersey, et cetera, that I wonder if guns can't propagate violence. Do you have any opinion on that? Or now they say in Chicago that it really hasn't worked. They have a real strict gun control in Chicago, and they have this high degree of violence.
Firearms are used by the person who has them in their hand. It's that person's souls, that person's gumption, whether they're going to be violent or not. Now, of course, if you have firearms readily available and you're a bad person, you're going to use what's readily available to hurt other people. But going back as a right, as a free society, we have responsibilities. And as a free society, we have a right to do certain things under the Constitution as backed up by our history. So to use a dichotomy that we have free firearms use and that translates into higher violence, I think that's a false dichotomy. I think it's more so with culture. I think it's more so with the neighborhood you live in and whether you're more apt to use violence in your personal dealings with each other. You look at the past, for example, before the 50s and before the Great Society and before welfare and all that type of good stuff, violence was actually rather low in the United States, and you can order firearms. Everybody had a firearm, even in large cities. But things have changed culturally in the United States to where there's more violence out there. You look at the violence going on, a lot of it has to do with drugs. A lot of it has to do with gang warfare in that regard, if you look at the actual statistics.
I understand that there's a new bill that's being proposed of being able to carry a firearm in the state of Texas without being licensed.
Yeah, there's a bill proposed.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I haven't read the bill, so I don't know exactly
I haven't either.
What it is. I don't know what the restrictions are. I guess what it boils down to is what your feeling is on personal freedom, I guess. If I'm really of a libertarian mind. I believe that if you're a citizen and you're not doing any harm to anybody, you should be free, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. Of course, in reality, if you're too free, then you have violent people or mentally deranged people who are going to do harm. I believe that most free in our the more free you are in society, the better. And with freedom comes responsibility, and it's dangerous freedom. So if you're free to use all the drugs you want to use, that's going to be a bad thing. But it's your personal responsibility to take care of yourself, and your family's responsibility to kind of watch over you. Concerning firearms, constitutional right to carry, whether people are going to carry around. Do I think it's a good idea? Yeah, I think you're free, and if you feel that you can carry one around, not hurt anybody, what's the big deal? And I was thinking about that, and it wasn't preparing for this because I didn't prepare at all for this.
Sorry about that.
But I was thinking about concerning the carry of firearms and different people who carry and the way they act and items like that. And then I was thinking about freedom because there's reasonable restrictions in freedom, and we argue about it. And I was thinking about the founding of the country and our constitutional freedoms because I'm a constitutionalist. There's the founding, there's the papers that back up the founding, and then we have the Constitution, which lays the framework, and then of course we have the amendments to the Constitution. And the founders fought the war, separated from England, and then they got together and they set up the government, and they set the basic framework of government and said, hey, we bled and we suffered, and this is the way we set up the government, and if future generations want to change it, you can, but you got to follow these rules to change it. And these rules make it hard to change, and these rules pretty much make it to where there has to be a consensus of people to get it to change our framework of government that we set up. And I was really thinking about that because I got into a conversation with somebody else that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and it should change easily with whatever society states. But that's not what was the intention of the founders. The intention of the founders was, this is how we set it up. You all can change it, but you have to follow due process of law to do so, which is the amendment process and items like that. And then that then goes back to the due process of law that we fight about every day. The Fourth Amendment and all the other amendments concerning trial and stuff like that. And you have to follow the law. The government can do things to you, but they have to follow due process rules to get to that point. Because otherwise, tyranny happens and bad things happen. How does that happen? Search and seizures. It used to be back in the 1880s up to the 1920s that the Fourth Amendment meant something. You go to the 60s to where it changed because they actually strengthened the Fourth Amendment, but then slowly started giving exclusions to searches and items like that to where the government does not have to follow the rules. The government has to follow the rules to convict you. The government has to follow rules to keep itself straight, because human beings are themselves going to try to oppress you. If we're in a group of friends, you're going to have that one strong-willed person who's going to oppress the rest of the people. Same thing with the government. Look at the people who go into power. They're the same folks that you had in student council, and you never liked them. And it just translates into where you get power, you get too much power unchecked, and then you get your rights trampled. So it all goes back down to freedom. Restrictions on freedom. If you want to change it, follow the due process of law, the way the due process is shown out in the Constitution, not change it around because it's more convenient.
Well, returning back, and we'll go backwards and come. I kind of thought the concealed handgun license, I was kind of surprised how well it worked. Even though I'm not a big fan of it, because whenever you're stopped by a police officer, right away he knows you got a gun in the car, and that's the first thing he wants. And you lose a substantial amount of freedom by the questionnaire, the thumbprinting, the palm printing. You lose.
Right.
They have a complete record of you once you get one of these concealed handgun licenses. And actually, since I got one, it's my understanding now you can legally carry a gun in your vehicle.
Yes.
Is that correct? So I wouldn't have gotten one because, probably wouldn't have gotten one given that. But whatever, I have it, and perhaps I'll keep it. So I kind of thought it was a little bit overreaching, because it seems like it takes, I hate to say it like this, but it takes a certain amount of discipline to sign up for the course, to take the course, to pay for the course, to pay for the gun. So you have a selection process regarding the concealed handgun license that it might even be discriminatory from a social class viewpoint. Poor people can't get them, can't afford to take the class, can't afford to keep up the license, so it might even be discriminatory, but I thought it worked rather well. So I don't know if I'm for just everybody, every Joe, just speaking, you got into a lot of concepts, very well stated. I don't know if I'm for every Joe Blow that I see over here at Stripes carried a gun, but I understand your position.
And of course, in a society as ours, in any society, that's always a question. How far does it go? How far do you go? How do you restrict it within reason? Philosophically, sure, everybody can carry just as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But you can't have mentally deranged people do so, because they're going to shoot you, they're going to kill you, or they're going to kill themselves. So you have to be careful that way, and then that's where the argument comes in, for legislation. How do we get that without bad things happening? And that's always going to be an argument concerning any type of legislation.
And then you talked briefly about drugs too, and drugs and deregulation, and you're saying, and we'll get back to the being a constitutionalist in a second, but the deregulation, you're implying that you don't really believe that drugs should be illegal. Is that right?
I don't.
Excuse me. And I've thought that before. I'm one of these people on that particular issue. I go back and forth, and I do know that a great amount of money is it goes towards that problem, and a lot of police, a lot of a lot of drug busts, a lot of DEA, a lot of a lot of money. But you don't think the drug problem will get worse?
No.
I would agree. I don't think it will get worse.
I don't think it will.
Have you been up to Colorado since they legalized marijuana?
I haven't, but I have a lot of friends who have.
And what are they saying? One criticism I heard is that they claim a large percentage of people that are on the roads are smoking while they're high while they're on marijuana.
I haven't heard that. So.
And then I heard a lot of the second tier, guys, I hate to say second tier, but a lot of waiters, waitresses, etc., kind of high. So those are two criticisms. What about philosophically about doing the drugs? It's harmful to people. In other words, I'm going to say this. I don't think drugs do people. I'm not going to say my generation's very, very few people that didn't smoke marijuana. Very, very, very few. And I do know a number of people that ran into problems with it, serious problems, that they smoked their entire lives and eventually caught up to them. You don't think in the days before this proliferation of drugs, maybe the society was better, a more conservative moral society?
Well, see, and that's where it gets complicated. Because you can go back in history and state, well, hey, cocaine was used in Coca-Cola. Cocaine was used as an over-the-counter drug for toothaches. So was heroin. And then, of course, you turn back, well, there were the heroin dens. You know, people got hooked on Coca-Cola or these other deals because they liked the feeling of cocaine and it took over their lives. And that's where you have the strain with personal responsibility. Because again, with freedom comes responsibility. If you're not responsible with your freedom, then you hurt yourself, you hurt others, and you also hurt your society and your family and the place you live in, because then that brings other people who are willing to judge and oppress you to pass legislation to then have a fail-safe for everybody, which then oppresses everybody rightfully or wrongfully. Marijuana, for example, because that's the subject around the nation right now. Marijuana was not a big deal before the 50s. Marijuana was not a big deal before Border Patrol pushed forth their Operation Wetback, which we all know about. It's more of a culture thing to oppress. That's why legislation was passed, because it was easy to pass, because we had all the hippies, we had all this distrust in government, we had all these problems with the younger generation who were pushing forth, and they're smoking a lot of weed and a lot of drugs, and the people who were in power did not like that. And that's how that legislation gets passed. And then what happens? Now we have a lot of people who use it because it's a kind of a silly law, and their lives are getting ruined. I remember when I was younger, high school, any job you tried to get, you had to take a drug test. Any job. And if you smoked weed or did whatever drug, you came out hot, you don't get a job. If you get hurt on the job, they do a drug test. So even if you use, say, and now you can get away from marijuana, say that you had a backache and your wife has an old codeine tablet that you just kept, and you're like, oh man, my back hurts. Well, here, take the tablet. It'll help the pain. Okay, and then you get hurt the next Tuesday doing something. Don't remember about taking this tablet. It's a pain pill, and then you came out hot for that drug, and then boom, you lost a job. You're not going to get workman's comp because they're going to state that you're high during the work, violating company policy.
I'm not going to disagree, but that is an extreme and rare. That'd be extreme and rare to happen, right?
No, it happens a lot.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the issue regarding drugs, one of the points you brought up is something that I remember they were going to try to, regarding freedom, they were going to set up these checkpoints in the city of Corpus Christi to check everybody for DWI. And I said, well, what are you crazy? There's people, especially like, there's certain religious groups, Baptists for one, they say don't drink at all.
Right.
And I'm sure there's Baptists in this community who never had a drink, and they're going to be subjected to a checkpoint search when they've never taken a drink in their life. Is that fair to them?
Right.
You know, so yeah, there's a lot of issues regarding this freedom. The drug issue it's kind of interesting though. You know this, and I've joked with other criminal defense attorneys about it. I said, well, look, if these guys ever quit doing drugs in their cars, we're all going to be out of business.
Yeah.
Drugs are almost semi-legal if you do them at home, right? I mean, how many cases do you get where they're busting people at home? Not that many, right? So I'm not certain that the system doesn't work to a certain extent. Another open secret. You know, in Nueces County, since I've been practicing here 31 years, your first possession of marijuana, in many respects, was a gimme. They just give you a pretrial diversion.
Yeah.
You know, which left you with no record if you finished it. So we weren't so onerous here, I didn't think. But But your philosophical stand, though, is it would be better, create less problems. I understand if drugs were legal. I understand in some of the Scandinavian countries that they consider drugs, they look at them as a health problem.
Yeah.
You know, the issue there though is that people have talked about this before. It's kind of like since you're getting to the issue of freedom, like motorcycle helmets and all that, and drugs. Who pays for these people's medical bills? You know,
Right.
if they're in accidents. You know, so there's a legitimate tension, right?
Yeah, and there's always going to be a tension because again, you're always going to have somebody who thinks that they have a better vision of your life or the way that things should go than you. You always have somebody who's going to think that you don't raise your children the right way, the way it should be. And it always translates into money. And that's a good argument concerning, well, it's costing society all this,
Right.
concerning illegal drug use and motorcycle accidents and not using seat belts and items like that. And that is very true. And that's why there's always going to be the tension. If you go to drugs, has in any real way we saved any money or funds for government or for society by making all drugs illegal and sending people to prison, for example? Or do we not have rehab units that are overflowing as we are now? Alcoholism, that's legal. And I know people who go buy a jug of whiskey every couple of days. I know people who go to court intoxicated every day.
Lawyers.
Yes,
Yeah, we do have that issue.
yeah, and but that's a legal deal.
Well, you know, are they as good as lawyers? Is it fair to the public to have them out there?
And then there you go with whether he's going to get any work after that because you get a reputation.
Did you vote for the Libertarian candidate for president?
No,
No, you didn't?
No.
Why not?
because I'm a pragmatist.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't think, I don't know much about him, but I didn't think he was a bad candidate.
He's a great guy. He's all about freedom. His vice president
I didn't know who that
candidate.
was.
He is this Boston Yankee that I didn't like much, but
I'm semi-Yankee myself, so no, I'm just teasing.
if you hear what he was talking about, Gary Johnson's a good guy. I liked him a lot.
I think I thought he was treated atrociously by the press.
Oh yeah.
I think some of those questions, like that Aleppo question, was a setup.
Oh yeah.
You know, I asked somebody, what do you think about Aleppo? You don't say Aleppo, Syria. You don't say the refugee crisis in Aleppo, Syria. You say, what do you think about Aleppo? That was a setup. I thought it was awful. Then they asked him that one question about world leaders or something. Which world leader do you admire? I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to say. Who am I going to say? I don't know. Who would I say? Putin. I like Putin because he brought back Christianity back to Russia. I like that. I don't know. So I thought he was set up. So being a pragmatist, you really weren't for him. On the constitutional issue, you call yourself a constitutionalist, and Judge Stith gives out these little constitutions, right? And, so many years pass, and you forget a lot of this stuff about the Constitution, right? So I'm looking at the laws, and I have some friends that always talking about the Constitution. So, well, there's not much in that Constitution. They set up the Senate, the Congress, House of Representatives, and the only real right that I recall in the original Constitution is the right to habeas corpus. But, of course, all these amendments afterwards, and I tell people, I go, well, look, you're saying that's the Constitution, but we had a constitutional amendment, what was it, the 14th, prohibiting alcohol for a while, of course, and then they changed it again. All those constitutional amendments, they could be, they had the one regarding the one amendment they wanted to bring forth regarding women. I don't remember what, equal pay or something. They wanted to pass that amendment. So the Constitution really is pretty changeable, right? Under the Bill of Rights and all, they could get rid of those rights, right?
Yeah, but you have to follow the process to do so, which is a difficult process.
Right. The as a criminal defense lawyer, we're talking about, your rights and et cetera. So, what is the major defense to a criminal case if you're found with drugs in your vehicle? What's your major defense usually? Isn't it? It's a constitutional right.
Well, yeah, it's
search and seizure,
unreasonable searches and seizures, and that's a good topic because you read the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that all citizens are to be secure on their person from unreasonable searches and seizures. And the original case law and legislative notes state that government is to not enter your home and is to not search you and is to not search your papers in person unless it's reasonable. They want you to be free. Law enforcement or government is not supposed to be able to just walk in your door and look at your stuff. Government is not supposed to be able just to say, "Hey, what do you have?" and fill you up. Government is supposed to leave you alone, unless due process is followed and they follow the warrant requirement, or something is happening right there where it's clear. Later on, there's exigent circumstances, but that is the original intent of the law. And the Supreme Court has weakened the Fourth Amendment on freedom due to drug problems, due to the drug war and all that type of good
tremendously.
stuff. Yes, and that's not right because not following the Constitution. For the Supreme Court or any judge or any lawyer, district attorneys, for example, to argue, that right is not set in stone. We should have this exclusion to follow that because of this, because it helps law enforcement, or it's too hard for us to stop people from having drugs. Well, that's not the intent of the law. That's not stable government. That's just allowing you at this time, due to your needs, to violate people's rights and make everything unstable.
And the pretense against drugs, I got to admit, I'm a kind of a conspiratorialist. I mean, it's not as if the government has never been found to be dealing in drugs.
I agree.
And I have a hard time believing that there's not some participation based upon a few instances that we know in the proliferation of drugs in the United States, that the drugs aren't being used as a means of social control by our government themselves. This is something that was predicted. It's very complicated. And those are some of my reservations. It's not as if the government doesn't have some history of that, and as in gun running, under recent scandal, and yet they're in a way it's arguably being used as a means of all these police, your abrogation of due process rights and the increased police force and the increased government agencies such as Homeland Security, which is now setting up busts to do other things than terrorism, etc. They do many things if you get over there to federal court. I think I've seen you over there. Mm-hmm. And they set up these agencies and abrogating people's rights, setting people up for crimes via the internet. Very questionable.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of the Homeland Security agencies engaged in kind of entrapment of people on the internet?
All the time.
Cases? Right.
All the time. They're new, because as we all know, there's always the flavor of the month type of crime that they want to squash.
Yes.
Right now, it's sex slaves. That's what the band is playing right now with the federal government and the local DAs is sex slaves due to immigration. And out of Houston, Dallas, Kansas City is a big hub, supposedly what they say. But it's interesting how that is the agenda they push. They have a huge press release. They have a huge press corps who pushes that, which I believe is propaganda.
I don't believe that should be. Yeah, who's getting paid to write those press releases?
Right.
The U.S. Attorney General, et cetera, comes out with. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but you're right.
Who's getting paid for that? What kind of job is that? Our government, right, is paying for somebody to write these propaganda press releases. And if you've ever had a case wherein you take a case and then all of a sudden, it gets all this publicity strictly because they wrote a press release and basically it's creating a witch hunt against your client.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, and it seems like those are sometimes could be pretty fraudulent cases or questionable.
Right, and they are, but that's the flavor now. We'll notice locally family violence.
They're beating us to death
right.
through the use of the Corpus Christi Caller Times, and they even openly call it a persuasive journalism. Mm-hmm. They're trying to use journalism to propagate an alleged social problem, which you and I deal with every day.
Right.
And I'm sure that your experience with domestic violence is very similar to mine. Wherein people engage in these fights, and then they're sorry, then they want to get back together, and then the prosecutor's threatening them. We're going to subpoena you, and if you don't testify, we're going to charge you with filing a false report. And I feel sorry for the DA's office on some of those issues. In all honesty, we have a new DA too.
Right.
Did you follow any of that controversy, or were you involved in any of the controversy regarding Mark Skirka and them not releasing all the evidence, et cetera?
Yeah.
What was your opinion on all that?
The controversy was absolutely true. They were not giving out what the Morton Act said they're supposed to give out. They were hiding evidence. We're all part of that, and we all know that's the truth. Whether it was due to inefficiency or they did it on purpose is an argument.
And that's what I thought. You get a case. There's so much evidence, especially on the bigger cases, and I never quite the DA's office or the federal they've never quite kept up with the discovery as they do in the civil cases. In other words, really, everything should really be bait stamped, and then you show it to the judge and say, "This is what I got," and then you would know. Of course, this would be. I guess it's pretty labor intensive. Yeah, I didn't have that much of a problem. Now you're from San Diego. I don't know how many other counties you practiced in, but you probably practiced in counties up until 5 years, up until the new Morton rule. They wouldn't give you any evidence.
Right.
In one of these small towns, maybe did you ever hear of a guy called Wiley Cheatham, the DA? There was a DA. You know how these towns go. I forgot. Maybe it was Live Oak, and he basically wouldn't give you any evidence, and you'd have to fight with him tooth and nail, and then you'd have to go to trial, and then ask the police officer for did you keep any reports, etc. So I thought the Morton Act, that act which required them to put the evidence forth, was a good act. I was kind of surprised that Texas passed it.
Well, it passed it because it was that bad. That's how bad it was in the state of Texas. That it was so bad on people getting wrongful convictions and people being railroaded that a conservative legislature with a conservative governor passed that quickly.
Right.
That's how bad it was.
And interesting. It's very interesting, and I'm kind of proud of the state of Texas that you have more rights under the state of Texas than you do under the federals.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And I think probably they were getting hit for all these lawsuits, all these guys serving, prison time for being wrongfully convicted. I assume that might have been an economic motive.
It was, and also it looked bad. What you have to understand, it's really simple. Everybody wants to make things complicated. If the government is accusing you of a crime, the government has a responsibility to provide you with all of their information and not hold back, because you are entitled as a citizen to a fair trial and to a proper defense. That's simple. It really is. But district attorneys, although they all have this saying, we're here for justice to be done, and I'm like that, they don't, because district attorneys have seminars to where they discuss how they can suppress evidence and how they can find ways around the Constitution and how they can teach officers or government agents how to go around the Constitution, which goes around the whole aura of being fair and just. Because if you're accused of a crime, although you're 100% guilty of it, you're entitled to a fair and proper defense, and the government has to show you everything they've got. If you're guilty, you're going to be found guilty. Don't hide stuff or do underhanded things to get to that point. And that was going on in the state of Texas, and still is, quite frankly, but in different counties, it's different.
Dallas had a bad reputation for many years, alleged saying that any prosecutor could get a conviction of a guilty man. It's a very skilled prosecutor, a good prosecutor that could get a conviction from an innocent man. And I went up once or twice during my practice to practice up in Houston. I had an atrocious time. There was I can't remember the name of the DA who was there for many years. Had a very bad reputation towards that. But the agenda is obviously law and order. Get these people off the street. They're criminals. Keep society safe for working class Americans. Isn't that what the agenda is for?
That's the agenda, but yet again, going back to the founding, there are rules. And these rules are supposed to be followed. And the reason the rules are there is because government has all this power and human beings will oppress each other. And that's why these rules are there as checks to protect freedom.
You told me right before that you were speaking in an area of Corpus Christi called Molina regarding what, due process rights? What was the discussion about?
It's a free advice clinic from the Corpus Christi Bar Association, and we set up over at the Molina Neighborhood Center, and people from the community or from across city, of course, but going there, and we were giving advice concerning different areas of the law to try to help them out. A lot of folks don't know the law, as we know. A lot of folks don't know what their rights are. A lot of folks don't know what to do. So you have somebody who's more sophisticated than you are, and they know that you don't know what's going on. They're going to find a way to, I know I'm using this word a lot, but to oppress you. You have a landlord who is a slumlord, and you have no money, you have no education, you don't know what's going on, and yet the landlord won't fix the heater or the air conditioner or the pipe where you're living in a place that you cannot really live in because it's uninhabitable. But you don't know what to do because you need a place to live and you're paying this rent and you can't be kicked out because that landlord's going to ruin your credit. You can't get into another place. So you just sit there and take it because the landlord takes advantage of you. Those are some of the issues we deal with. Other issues are family law issues where somebody won't let them see the children. They don't know what to do, kind of guide them in that direction. A couple other people had some slip and falls. They didn't know what to do because insurance comes pushing them around. So they didn't know what avenue to take. Items like that.
So you gave free advice over there in Molina today, but you didn't really get much in regarding criminal.
No, generally, as a system is set up, you get arrested for something and you go to jail, then you get appointed somebody, or you go to a lawyer.
How does that system work in Nueces County? There's been controversy the 30 years I've been here, is that the judges appoint who they want and offer their favorites, and then some of the judges says, we're not going to do that, we're going to use a list, etc., and go down the list. And there's been controversy about that for years in Nueces County regarding whether or not the judges are using the court appointments as a patronage system, and some of the judges said they were going to change it. How are most of the judges doing it now, appointing attorneys to their court?
Magistrate court appoints off a wheel. If it gets past magistrate court, the judges are supposed to be following a list that they have. If you are sitting there on an arraignment day, and if you're sitting there, you're most likely going to get appointed if the judge thinks that you have the adequate skills for the type of case that's before them. It's yes, there is some favoritism. Yes, some judges don't follow the wheel, but most do.
Well, some years ago, Nelva Gonzalez Ramos had set up this system where you're supposed to fill out this thick packet of all these questions. Is that still in effect? When you're supposed to, the criminal defense attorney to get on the list was supposed to answer 1,000 questions or something? No, quite a few questions, maybe 12 to 15 pages. Is that still in effect?
To get appointed to,
Yes.
There is a packet under Senate Bill 7 we have to fill out. It's maybe like 5 pages long. It's
Do you think
it's not cumbersome.
Well, you're talking about oppression and freedom. I have to say that I don't think that the system of trying to regulate people who get court appointments is necessarily effective. I think some years ago when San Antonio was using a straight wheel system, it was much fairer. And then I think in Nueces County, I do think there's a patronage system. I do think you can get blackballed easily from receiving court appointments if you fight the system or if you lose your temper for any number of things. So I really don't think that the average criminal, I think many people in Nueces County that are suspect of the court-appointed lawyer system here and want to hire their own lawyers, I think sometimes they have reason to be suspect. Is that correct or incorrect? We're just talking.
In some portions, yeah. There's courts I don't get appointed cases at all from. So, yeah.
And you would assert that there's not good reason you're getting appointed. So you haven't done anything wrong or you haven't been incompetent, or right?
Right.
So it's inequitable. It could be inequitable.
Could be, yes.
Okay. And in Molina, we talked about this before the show. Do you ever discuss, is there a lot of, do you think police violence? We have clients that call us almost every day that say, look, I got beat up by this cop for no reason, etc. Do you see that a problem in and around our area? Do you think it's, a lot of times are these people bringing this on themselves? Do you think the police officers here often lose their tempers? And how did you see this Black Lives Matter and the alleged police abuses throughout the United States regarding black citizens being shot without good cause? There's a lot of subjects there.
I guess I can cover all that in that before the body cams were placed on the officers, I'd go to the jail and 9 out of 10 of my male clients would have a black eye, would be complaining about getting beat up, would have huge scrape marks on the side of their face where their face was being rubbed into the gravel. After the body cams were mandated, I have yet to see one that wasn't actually under influence of drugs or fighting the officers legitimately.
And who mandated the cameras?
I believe, I don't know. I think it was
maybe
state.
I think it was state
Yeah.
and counties over a certain citizenry. And by the way, I used to get a lot of them. The TMPLA, some of the local smaller counties had a kind of a similar to a union organization of the police officers. And reading their magazine once, the magazine actually encouraged the placement of cameras because of the fact that accusations of police brutality did go down. Mm-hmm. And, in a way, in defense of the police, kind of makes sense. If you're not supervised, I don't know how big your staff is as your office or something, but you try to be there to supervise your staff as much as you can. And the police are out there unsupervised. Yeah. So they could, it's human nature, right? For them to do what they want. So I'm glad that the cameras have had a degree of success in your experience.
There's success in the cameras showing to where people don't get beat up, or if the person's acting violently toward the officer, you can see that because that does happen. It hasn't been successful in the sense that now that the officers are using, cut it off, that the officers are using the body cams as an avenue to trick witnesses into saying certain things.
That's interesting.
And to tricking your client into making admissions that they normally wouldn't make.
Right.
I've seen that a lot. And we've seen it where there'll be a complaining witness sitting there and the officer has a body cam and the officer starts interrogating the witness, and when the witness doesn't say something that they like, they then change the question or they answer the question for the witness. And that's been the opposite of good.
Yes, because it's kind of a complex legal question regarding when that police officer is supposed to read the Miranda rights.
Right.
And, for example, I've always thought when that officer, before he asks you, after he stops your vehicle, before he asks you to start taking those field sobriety tests, he should read you the Miranda rights because he suspects you. But no, they say no, we don't have to. Maybe after that. But whatever. So there's this point the Miranda rights are supposed to be read. So I guess what you're saying is they trick you arguably before the Miranda rights have to be read to you. Mm-hmm. So those statements could come in at trial against you.
Right.
Reminds me a little bit of this body camera thing. For years, I've told people when it came up, I said, you shouldn't really be talking in the back of this police car because they're videotaping you. And the videotape statements in the back of the police cars, how often are they admitted on the DWIs? Have you had any trials where in those statements where in the back of the police cars are admitted? It almost seems like I can't remember. Should they be admitted?
They admit them all the time.
Even though but usually at the time they put you back there, that's when they read you the Miranda rights, correct? In the back of the car.
If you've been read them, normally you never read them. They'll on a DWI, for example, on a DWI. Once they place you under arrest, they're supposed to read you the DSC-24, which lets you know about the statutory warning, which doesn't ever get done.
That's a form. There's a DIC-23 and a DIC-24. That's what these forms are labeled.
Right.
The officers are supposed to read you, and what does that form say? The DIC-24.
The DIC-24 is your statutory warning, letting you know that you're being arrested for a DWI, and they want to get a specimen from you, and whether you're going to agree to specimen or not.
Right.
Then the DIC-25 is your notice of suspension, but that comes after the fact. But it's a DIC-24 that they're supposed to read to you before you say yes, I'll take a specimen or not, which then goes to the blood warrants. Because if you didn't
so I think you insinuated or stated that they're not doing that. They're not reading it to you.
No.
So you think people are losing rights because this form isn't read to them, and they're submitting to blood or alcohol tests when they don't need to be?
They are not being read the warning as a law states it's supposed to be read to them.
I see.
Which is a due process violation. So in Nueces County, you're going to get a blood test anyway. There doesn't get a warrant.
You know what? Go ahead.
Well, you are.
I was going to say that since you talked about oppression, et cetera, and you're very oriented towards people's rights, I find it very offensive that the government puts a needle in your arm and draws your blood. Personally offensive, unsafe, just egregious, to determine whether or not you have alcohol content. I could see almost any other test being less invasive. I don't know. I don't know how that could be, permitted legally. I'm not here to construct those arguments, but I just think it's one of the worst things that I've seen since I've been practicing.
I agree. I absolutely agree, and that's where it gets to me. That's your basic Fourth Amendment right, an unreasonable search and seizure. They are seizing your body, and they are searching it through a needle.
Right.
And it's just that is your basic tenet of being let alone, and that violates that.
Whether they have a warrant, I mean, now I could construct an argument that maybe if there's an accident, somebody's dead. But maybe if you have a child in the car, but just if you're driving and you're suspected of a DWI, and they'll take a breath test. And moreover, maybe you know this better than me. Maybe you've read current statistics. Is there any indication that a blood test is it more accurate than the breath?
No. We get a lot of blood tests thrown out because the phlebotomist doesn't do it right.
Well, the other thing is, it's kind of a con when they say a blood test. They're not testing the blood. Right. They're testing the air above the blood, correct? Right. So they have this idea, you would have this idea that it's more accurate because they're actually testing the blood. They're not.
I agree. And the chemist or the phlebotomist is trained to testify a certain way.
Oh, they're well trained. They're very sly, and unless that's all you do, they have their tricks. And they're gonna, you're not gonna maybe be able to fox them unless that's all you do. How are the juries? Would you say the juries are pretty good at if it's within a margin of error, maybe of like let's say legally 0.08 is the legal grounds for intoxication now, correct? Over 0.08. If you come at a 0.10 or so is illegal, would the average juror perhaps acquit you because they think, well, it's close enough?
It depends on the video. If you look okay on the video, you can have double the amount of alcohol in your system, and a reasonable jury a lot of times will acquit you anyway because they won't trust the amount of alcohol that's being prescribed to them through the test correlates with the way you look in that video.
Okay, so they may go by the video a little bit closer.
They go by the video most of the time. Now you'll have juries say, well, he didn't look bad on the video, but he came out higher with the blood. So we trust the blood. The law says, or losing your physical faculties, or this, and they'll go that route. But generally, as a general rule, you look good, you look okay in the video, they'll disregard a lot of the blood or breath evidence.
When I started practicing, it was a 0.12. Yeah. Then it went to 0.10. Now it's 0.08. And I get a kick out of that when people talk about intoxication. I go, well, I guess that is whatever they want it to be.
Yeah, and
if it was right? What are you going to do now? Bring it down to 0.06? I don't know. I haven't heard that being argued.
They're trying to.
Well, so I guess intoxication could mean anything.
Right. It's what the law says it is.
Well, again, when you say there's a flavor of the month, some years ago, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other citizen groups, and obviously nobody wants to see anybody get killed in a car accident, but you got cars, you got alcohol, it's legal to drink, so this is a problem. But I think there was a Mothers Against Drunk Driving, et cetera, was a pretty big lobbying organization for the tightening up of the DWI laws. Yeah.
They're huge. They're the lobbying organization. They're huge, and they get lots of funding, and they have lobbyists. They have full-time lobbyists now across the nation, and that's what they do. That's what they do. You have a big DWI case, they have representatives in the courtroom.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, that's just what they do. And
I feel like going over there and no, I'm just.
And the thing is, it's just not. I understand.
It's a judgment call. You'd hate to see somebody's, lost a child. We're not heartless, right?
I agree.
But.
And that's where it gets scary because although you may have not been intoxicated, but you had a beer at Applebee's and alcohol came out in your system, they're going to try to send you to prison when it's just really a car accident.
Oh, on a car accident. Well, it's usually going to be the third one, though, right? Of the felony DWI status. You think that sometimes you'll go to prison with a car accident, intoxication. I don't think I've really seen that.
Intoxication assault?
Well, intoxication assault, perhaps.
Yeah, because it so long as you have a serious bodily injury, you went to the ER.
Right.
And you have soft tissue injuries, they are going to charge you with intoxication assault.
Yeah, I represented some intoxication manslaughter cases, you know, and it could, you know, they could be tragic. Obviously, one kind of bothers me to this, you know, to this day. My client actually went to the other lane and killed 2 people.
Yeah,
which is just awful. Then I had another one wherein my client was driving and there was construction and the vehicle overturned. You know what I mean? Anybody could have been in an accident. Yeah. I think the other thing people should know is if you're in an accident, serious accident, and you're intoxicated, they're going to say your intoxication was the cause of that accident.
Absolutely.
Even if it wasn't. And that's what happened in that occasion. So people need to be wary about driving and drinking. You know, one of the things that I find disconcerting talking about drinking and driving is I'm thinking that the cell phone, and many people say this, is actually more and the texting and or the cell phone is actually as much or more dangerous than the drinking and driving. And it doesn't seem like they're very enthusiastic about enforcing the use of the cell phone prohibition while driving. Well, you've been on the show. I appreciate you coming on and talking about that. Anything like coming up that you think is important for people to know about that you wanted to get on your propagandize or?
It's to be a whole new world. We have a new DA, and with a whole new fresh of really, really smart, good people. It's going to be interesting.
Did you think the criticism that was made that the DAs, the assistant district attorneys, did not have enough discretion in giving out plea bargains under Mark Skirka was a legitimate criticism?
Yes.
Mark Skirka was on the show, and he said that wasn't true. He said it would be physically impossible for him to actually micromanage the prosecutors. It would be too many cases. That was his defense.
They have a memo stating what they're supposed to be doing and what they can do.
I didn't personally have a problem regarding most offers. But I did speak to an older prosecutor who said that he was being micromanaged. So what do I know?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just another practicing attorney. Thank you, Mr. Chris Waller, for coming on, local criminal defense attorney. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Good night.